Kendra's hands were still shaking when she pushed through the ICU doors at 7:47 p.m. The tremor wasn't fear. It was adrenaline draining from her bloodstream after 23 minutes of compressions. The memory of cracked ribs beneath her palms. The impossible relief when the monitor finally showed sinus rhythm. Mr. Patterson would see his grandchildren again. She'd made that happen. Her shoulders ached, her lower back screamed. And there was a coffee stain on her scrubs from 11 hours ago that had dried into a brown constellation across her left hip. Regina looked up from the nurse's station, her scrub cap printed with bright kente cloth patterns. "Girl, you look like death. Feel like it too." Kendra stripped off her gloves, the latex snapping against her wrists. "That's 16 compressions this month." "I'm getting too old for this. You're 37, not 70. Regina slid a glossy card across the counter. "Speaking of old, you see this mess." The invitation was heavy cardstock. Embossed gold lettering that caught the fluorescent lights. Metropolitan General Hospital Annual Charity Gala, black tie. Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. Kendra's eyes snagged on the number at the bottom. $500 per ticket, 500. She said it out loud, tasting the impossibility. "That's my car payment. That's my electric bill and half my water." Regina tucked the invitation back into her bag. "They sent these to every department. Like we're supposed to pretend we can afford to eat rubber chicken with the people who decide our raises." Kendra did the math automatically. The way she always did. $500 was 43 hours at the grocery store for Caleb's favorite cereal. The name brand kind she usually couldn't justify. It was new sneakers for him instead of the ones with the sole peeling away from the toe. It was saying yes to the movies instead of next month, maybe, we'll see. This morning felt like a week ago. Caleb had stood in their kitchen, small in his hand-me-down shirt, watching her scrape the last of the peanut butter from the jar for his sandwich. The scraping sound had been loud in the quiet apartment. He hadn't complained. He never did. He just asked if they could see the new superhero movie. And she'd kissed his forehead and said, "Next month, baby, I promise." Hating herself for promising things she couldn't guarantee. "You working a double?" Regina's voice pulled her back. "Night shift starts at 8. Figured I'd grab dinner in the cafeteria. Try not to fall asleep standing up. You're gonna burn out." Kendra can't afford to burn out. She managed a smile. "Bills don't pay themselves." Regina squeezed her hand, warm and solid. "You're the best nurse on this floor." "You know that, right?" Kendra nodded because Regina needed her to, but the words felt hollow. Best nurse on the floor couldn't afford the $500 ticket. Best nurse on the floor was wearing sneakers so worn down the arch support was a memory. Best nurse on the floor had just saved a man's life and would spend her dinner break eating vending machine crackers because the cafeteria pasta was $3 she could save. At 8:15, she was heading toward the cafeteria when she saw Dr. Kowalski. Lena Kowalski, the attending physician who'd supervised Kendra through Mr. Patterson's code, who'd said, "Good work, Kendra, you saved him." She moved through the hallway like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Emerald gown clinging to her frame, diamond earrings catching light with every step. Her heels clicked against linoleum, a sound that didn't belong in a hospital, too elegant, too expensive. She smiled at Kendra in passing, a distracted flash of recognition, and disappeared around the corner toward the administrative wing. Toward the gala. Kendra stood in the empty hallway, suddenly aware of every stain on her scrubs. Every ache in her body, every dollar she didn't have. The distance between her and Dr. Kowalski wasn't just a hallway, it was a chasm. Same hospital, same shift, different universes. She should go to the cafeteria. Should eat something that wasn't sugar and preservatives, should rest her feet. Should save her energy for the 12 hours ahead. Instead, she found herself walking toward the administrative wing, just to see. Just to look at the decorations Regina had mentioned, the ones that cost more than Kendra made in a month. Just to feel like she was part of the hospital community she'd served for 6 years. The place where she'd saved lives and earned nothing but exhaustion and a paycheck that never stretched far enough. The hallway changed as she walked. Linoleum gave way to marble. Fluorescent lights softened into warm overhead fixtures. She could hear music, something classical and expensive, and the murmur of voices, laughter that sounded easy and careless. The kind of laughter people made when they weren't calculating whether they could afford both groceries and gas. Kendra stopped at the edge of the lobby. Through the glass doors, she could see the ballroom entrance. Chandeliers, ice sculptures, women in gowns that cost more than her monthly rent. Men in tuxedos, champagne flutes balanced in manicured hands, white tablecloths. Flowers she couldn't name. A world that existed 3 floors above the ICU, where she'd just cracked a man's ribs to restart his heart. She wouldn't go in. She'd just look. Just stand here for a moment and pretend she belonged to this version of Metropolitan General. The one that got celebrated and photographed and featured in the society pages. She took one step into the marble lobby. A woman turned to look at her. Blonde hair in a perfect bob, a gown the color of champagne, diamonds at her throat that caught the light like small fires. Her eyes traveled down Kendra's body. From her tired face to her coffee-stained scrubs to her worn-down sneakers. And something shifted in her expression. Her eyes narrowed. Kendra didn't move, didn't breathe. Just watched as the woman in the champagne gown closed the distance between them with measured steps. Each click of her heels against marble, a small declaration of ownership. "I don't believe you're on the guest list." The woman's voice was silk wrapped around steel. Her smile fixed in place like something pinned to a board. She held a leather-bound clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Can I help you find your way back to your department?" The words were polite. The meaning underneath was not. Kendra felt heat rise in her chest, that familiar flush of being seen but not recognized, noticed but not valued. She straightened her spine, pulled her shoulders back despite the exhaustion that lived in her bones. "I'm an ICU nurse here, Kendra Osei. I just finished a shift and wanted to see the decorations during my break." "I wasn't planning to go in." The woman's smile tightened. Her eyes traveled down Kendra's scrubs again. Lingering on the coffee stain near her hip, the worn fabric at the knees. The sneakers that had walked 10,000 hospital corridors. "I see, well, as I'm sure you understand, this is a ticketed event. A private fundraiser for hospital donors and foundation supporters. The ticket price is quite significant for a reason, quite significant." As if Kendra didn't know exactly what that meant. As if Kendra hadn't calculated that $500 was groceries for 3 weeks. Was Caleb's after-school program for a month. Was the difference between making rent on time and explaining to her landlord why she needed another extension. "I understand that." Kendra kept her voice steady, professional. The same tone she used when explaining to families why their loved ones weren't going to make it home. "I wasn't trying to attend, I just wanted to see it." "Just for a minute, the lobby is part of the event space this evening." The woman's voice rose slightly. Not quite loud but louder, enough that the nearest guests turned to look. A man in a tuxedo paused mid-conversation, champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. "We have security protocols for a reason. The safety and privacy of our donors is paramount. Security protocols." As if Kendra were a threat. As if 6 years of saving lives in this building meant nothing because she couldn't afford entry to a party in the same building, where she'd cracked ribs and held hands and wiped tears, and told the truth even when the truth was unbearable. "I have my hospital ID." Kendra reached for the badge clipped to her scrub pocket. The laminated card with her photo, her name, her department. Proof that she belonged here, that this was her workplace. That she'd earned the right to stand on this marble floor, even if she couldn't afford to do it in a gown. "I'm an employee. I work here." The woman took the badge with 2 fingers. Held it up to the light like she was inspecting currency for counterfeits. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in theatrical skepticism. "Anyone could have a badge. We've had issues with unauthorized personnel in the past." She turned the badge over. examined the back, her expression suggesting she'd found something suspicious in the lamination. And this event is specifically for donors and physicians, not general staff. I'm sure you can understand the distinction, general staff. The words landed like a slap. Kendra felt something cold settle in her stomach. That familiar weight of being reduced, diminished, categorized as less than. She delivered CPR until her arms screamed. She'd held the hands of dying patients whose families couldn't get there in time. She'd worked double shifts because the hospital was understaffed and people would die if she went home. But she was general staff, not worthy of standing in the lobby of her own workplace because she couldn't pay the price of admission. More people were watching now. A couple in matching formal wear had stopped near the ballroom entrance, the woman whispering something behind her hand. Two men in tuxedos stood frozen mid-handshake. Their attention pulled to the confrontation unfolding in the center of the lobby. And across the space near the coat check, Kendra saw Dr. Kowalski, Lena, her supervisor, the woman she'd worked beside for 4 years, who knew Kendra's competence, who'd praised her clinical judgment just last week during rounds. Lena wore an emerald gown that made her pale skin glow. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant twist. She held a champagne flute in one hand, and her eyes met Kendra's across the marble expanse. Recognition flickered in her face, then something else. Something that looked like discomfort, or maybe guilt. Or maybe just the calculation of someone deciding whether to get involved in something messy. She didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there watching, her face carefully neutral. The woman in champagne was still holding Kendra's badge, still examining it like evidence in a crime she'd already decided had been committed. I'm going to need to verify this with security, her voice carried now. Projected for the growing audience, each word enunciated with careful precision. Please wait here, the lobby felt larger suddenly. The space between Kendra and the ballroom entrance stretching into something vast and unbridgeable. The chandeliers overhead seemed too bright, the music from inside too cheerful, the watching faces too many. Kendra stood in her coffee-stained scrubs, her worn-down sneakers, her exhaustion, and waited for security to confirm what everyone in this room had already decided about who belonged and who didn't. Darius arrived within 90 seconds. His radio crackling at his hip as he crossed the lobby. Kendra saw him before he reached the cluster of people gathered around Vanessa, and their eyes met. His expression shifted, just barely, recognition first, then something that looked like regret. He'd worked at Metropolitan General for 12 years. They'd shared countless night shifts, conversations in the hallway between emergencies, updates on his wife's diabetes management. He knew exactly who she was. Thank you for coming so quickly, Vanessa said, her voice carrying that same bright authority she'd used throughout the confrontation. This woman claims to work here, but she doesn't have a ticket to tonight's event. And I found her attempting to enter the ballroom. Darius looked at Kendra again, and she saw him make the calculation. Saw him weigh what he knew against what his job required. Ma'ams, he said quietly, addressing Kendra but not quite meeting her eyes now. Can I see your badge? She'd already shown it. Already proved who she was, but she pulled the lanyard from around her neck again and held it out. Her hand didn't shake, she wouldn't give them that. Darius examined the badge, running his thumb over the holographic seal that proved its authenticity. It's real, he said to Vanessa. She's ICU nursing staff, Kendra Osei. Been here 6 years. Anyone could borrow a badge, Vanessa said, waving one manicured hand dismissively. Or have one made. I'm sure you understand we need to be careful with an event of this caliber. I've worked with her. Darius said, and Kendra heard the strain in his voice. I know her, then you understand this is awkward for everyone. Vanessa's smile was thin, sharp. Kendra, is it? I'm going to need you to step over here, away from the entrance. Just until we can verify everything properly. The physical movement was small. 10 feet, maybe 12, from the center of the lobby toward the wall where the coat check stood. But Kendra felt the shift in her body. The way the guest's eyes followed her repositioning. The way being moved to the margins made her smaller somehow. Made her the problem that needed to be contained and managed. She went. What choice did she have? Darius followed, his presence both protective and imprisoning. The couple in matching formal wear had moved closer now, no longer pretending not to watch. The two men in tuxedos had been joined by their wives, all four of them forming a small audience near the ballroom doors. "Why would a nurse even be here?" one of the wives whispered, not quite quietly enough. The words carried across the marble, landed like stones. Her companion murmured something back. And they both looked at Kendra with the kind of curiosity usually reserved for unexpected animals in human spaces. Across the lobby, Dr. Kowalski still stood frozen near the coat check, champagne flute suspended halfway to her lips. Kendra watched her supervisor's face, saw the internal debate playing out in the tightness around her eyes, the way her free hand clenched and unclenched at her side. Lena knew this was wrong, had to know, but she was 30 feet away, and that distance might as well have been a canyon. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched with that same carefully neutral expression that said she'd already decided not to get involved. "Now," Vanessa said, her voice taking on a theatrical quality that suggested she was speaking for the gathered crowd as much as to Kendra. "I need to ask you some questions. You say you work here, and your badge appears legitimate. But that doesn't explain why you're at a ticketed charity event without having purchased admission. I told you," Kendra said, and she heard the exhaustion bleeding through her words now. The weight of the double shift and the humiliation and the sheer absurdity of having to justify her existence in her own workplace. "I just wanted to see it. I wasn't trying to crash the party, but you were in the lobby. You were looking into the ballroom." Vanessa tilted her head. And the gesture was almost sympathetic, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "Were you planning to take food from the buffet? I want to be clear, Kendra. This event cost $200 per plate. The catering alone represents a significant investment from our donors." The accusation hung in the air, crystallized into something solid and damning. Several guests had stopped pretending to have other conversations. They were just watching now, a small crowd gathered to witness whatever this was. A spectacle, a disruption of their elegant evening. "I wasn't going to take anything," Kendra said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "I work here. I've worked here for 6 years. I just wanted to feel like part of something. Or perhaps you wanted to take photographs." Vanessa's eyebrows lifted, as if she'd just thought of this possibility. Tabloids pay quite well for candid shots of wealthy donors at private events. "I'm sure a single mother on a nurse's salary might find that tempting." The words landed like a slap. Single mother, as if that were evidence of moral failing, of desperation, of someone who couldn't be trusted. Kendra felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been holding her upright through sheer force of will. "That's enough," Darius said quietly, but Vanessa spoke over him. "I think it's best if you leave the premises entirely." "Darius, please escort her out." The walk began with Darius's hand not quite touching her elbow. A gesture of escort that tried to be gentle but couldn't escape what it was. Kendra moved forward because there was nowhere else to go. Her worn sneakers silent against the polished marble, while Vanessa's heels clicked behind them like a countdown. The lobby stretched impossibly long, every step a small eternity. And Kendra kept her eyes forward, because looking at anything else would shatter whatever was left holding her together. Her eyes burned, the tears were right there, gathering hot and insistent behind her lids, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people who had already taken everything else. She blinked hard, focused on the exit doors ahead. On putting one foot in front of the other. On breathing in and out like it was a procedure she had to perform correctly. They passed the elevator bank where just 2 hours ago she'd ridden up with Mr. Patterson's Labs, joking with the transport tech about the broken coffee maker on 3 East. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else, some version of Kendra who still believed she had a place here. The hallway opened toward the ICU wing. And through the glass walls Kendra could see the nurses' station. The familiar chaos of monitors and charts, and the controlled urgency that was her home more than her apartment had ever been. Regina was standing at the medication cart, her back to the window, but something made her turn. Their eyes met through the glass. Regina's face changed, confusion shifting to alarm, and she moved toward the door, her hand already reaching for the handle. Kendra shook her head, a tiny movement but firm. Don't. Regina stopped, her hand frozen mid-reach. And Kendra could see her friend's mouth forming words she was too far away to hear. Probably cursing, definitely planning something. But Kendra shook her head again and kept walking, because if Regina came out here, if she made a scene, it would only make everything worse. Regina would get written up, maybe suspended, and for what? The damage was already done. Darius's voice came low and rough beside her ear. I'm sorry, Kendra, the words barely audible, meant only for her. I got a family, I can't lose this job, she understood. God help her, she understood. Darius had shown her pictures of his grandkids just last week. Told her about his wife's new insulin prescription that cost $300 even with insurance. He was trapped in the same system she was, just with different bars on the cage. But understanding didn't make the betrayal hurt less. Didn't change the fact that he was walking her out like a criminal when he'd worked beside her long enough to know exactly who she was. I know, she whispered back and meant it, and hated that she meant it. Vanessa's voice carried from behind them, pitched to reach not just Kendra, but anyone in earshot. Performing her authority for an invisible audience. We have to protect our donors' experience, I'm sure you understand, as if this were reasonable. As if escorting a nurse out of her own workplace was just good customer service. The gala represents months of planning and significant investment. We simply can't have disruptions, that's what Kendra was now. Not a person, not an employee who'd given 6 years of double shifts and skipped lunches and hands cramping from compressions. A disruption to be managed and removed. They reached the main entrance. Those tall glass doors that separated the hospital from the outside world. And Kendra stopped. Just stopped walking, her body refusing the final step, even though her mind knew it was inevitable. She turned to face Darius, really looked at him, and saw the shame written across his features. The way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. I've worked here 6 years, she said. Her voice came out steady somehow, though everything inside her was shaking. 6 years, Darius. I was here when your wife had her gallbladder out. I stayed late to make sure she was comfortable before you came to pick her up. His jaw worked. Muscles tensing beneath his skin. His eyes flickered up to hers for just a second before dropping back to the floor. File a complaint Monday, he said, the words coming out like he'd rehearsed them. Like someone had told him exactly what to say. I'll back you up, they both knew he wouldn't. They both knew that come Monday morning, if she even had a job left, Darius would suddenly remember things differently. Would say he'd just been following orders, doing his job, couldn't really speak to what happened or why. The system protected itself and people like Darius. People who needed their paychecks and their health insurance and their pensions. They couldn't afford to be heroes. She'd learned that lesson tonight in ways she'd never forget. Behind them, Vanessa's phone chimed. Kendra could hear her answering it, her voice bright and false. Yes, everything's handled, just a small security matter. The event is proceeding beautifully, a small security matter. 6 years of saving lives reduced to an inconvenience successfully managed. Kendra wondered if Vanessa would include this in her event report. A bullet point about maintaining standards and protecting donor experience. Probably get praised for it, probably get a bonus. The glass doors reflected Kendra's image back at her. A woman in wrinkled scrubs, hair escaping from its bun. dark circles under her eyes from too many shifts and too little sleep. Standing in the entrance of a hospital where she'd held strangers' hands as they died. Where she'd celebrated when patients coded and came back. Where she'd believed she mattered. She looked small, tired, defeated. Darius reached past her to push the door open. The night air rushed in, cooler than the climate-controlled lobby, carrying the smell of car exhaust and distant rain. One more step and she'd be outside, expelled, erased from the evening like she'd never been there at all. Kendra took a breath, preparing to step through, to accept this final humiliation and figure out how to survive it. Wait, the voice came from behind them, commanding and clear, cutting through the lobby's manufactured silence. Stop right there, Kendra turned. Theodore Bancroft stood at the entrance to the ballroom, still in his tuxedo. His face unreadable, but his eyes locked on her with an intensity that made the air feel charged. He moved forward with the kind of authority that made people step aside without being asked. And Vanessa's confident expression flickered into something uncertain. The man in the tuxedo moved like someone used to being obeyed. Kendra didn't recognize him at first, had never seen him before. This silver-haired stranger, crossing the lobby with purpose that made even Darius straighten beside her. The crowd that had watched her humiliation now watched this, another scene in tonight's theater of cruelty. Wait, he said again, closer now. And Kendra saw his eyes were gray and fixed on her face, with an intensity that made her want to step back. What's your name? Her throat felt tight. Even her name felt like something that could be used against her now. Kendra Osei. The change in his expression was immediate, profound. His mouth opened slightly, his hand lifted as if reaching for something just beyond grasp. Kendra from the ICU, she nodded, confused, and watched recognition flood his features like sunrise breaking over water. His eyes filled with something that looked like relief, like wonder. Like he'd been searching for her and couldn't believe she was real. You saved my daughter, his voice cracked on the word daughter, in the parking lot. July 18th, the date hit her like a physical thing, July 18th. The parking lot, the girl, it came back in fragments. Evening shift ending, her feet aching, thinking about getting home to Caleb. Then the scream, a woman's scream cutting through the humid summer air. Running toward it even though her shift was over, even though she was already late. Because that's what you do when someone screams like that. The girl on the asphalt, 16, maybe 17, her lips blue, not breathing. A woman beside her, the mother, saying, she just collapsed, she just fell. Saying it over and over like a prayer that could rewind time. Kendra dropping to her knees, checking for a pulse, finding nothing. Starting compressions, counting, breathing, compressions again. Her hands on the girl's sternum, pushing hard enough to break ribs because that's what saves lives, not gentleness. The mother crying, someone calling 911. Kendra not stopping, not slowing, even when her arms burned, even when the girl's father arrived and stood frozen in horror. 2 minutes, 4, 6, Kendra's scrubs soaked with sweat in the July heat. Thinking please, 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 thinking about Caleb, about all the mothers who needed their children to breathe. Then the gasp, the girl's chest rising on its own, her eyes fluttering. Paramedics arriving, taking over. The father gripping Kendra's shoulders and saying, thank you, his face wet with tears. Kendra staying until they loaded the girl into the ambulance. Until she knew the heart was beating steady. Until she could let herself believe it would be okay. She'd been 40 minutes late getting home, had to pay the babysitter extra, worth it. Always worth it, Sloan, Theodore Bancroft said now, and the name brought the girl into focus, made her real again. Her name is Sloan, she has an implanted defibrillator now. She's alive because of you, Vanessa's voice cut through, sharp with authority regained. Mr. Bancroft, I appreciate your gratitude, but this woman was trespassing at a ticketed event. We have protocols to protect our donors from. This woman is a nurse at this hospital. Theodore didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to, the words landed like a gavel. She works here, be that as it may. The gala has a $500 ticket price. And she was attempting to access. She saved my daughter's life. Theodore turned to face Vanessa fully now. And Kendra saw the woman's confident expression flicker. She performed CPR in a parking lot for 8 minutes, off the clock. She didn't have to stop. She'd already finished her shift, but she stopped. She saved Sloane. The lobby had gone silent, the kind of silence that holds its breath. Theodore turned back to Kendra, and his eyes were wet. I've been trying to find you. I only knew your first name. The hospital wouldn't release information about staff privacy protocols. I was going to make an announcement tonight, actually. Ask if anyone knew a nurse named Kendra who worked in the ICU. I wanted to thank you properly. Kendra felt something breaking open in her chest. 3 months, she'd thought about the girl sometimes, wondered if she was okay, but she'd never expected this. Never expected to be seen. She's doing well, Kendra asked, and her voice sounded small. She's thriving because of you. Theodore's hand found hers, gripped it. His palm was warm. And I find you being escorted out of your own hospital like a criminal. The words hung in the air. Accusation and question and horror all at once. Theodore turned to the crowd that had gathered. The donors in their gowns and tuxedos. The administrators who'd watched her humiliation in silence. His voice carried across the marble lobby, clear and commanding. This is Kendra Osei. She's an ICU nurse here at Metropolitan General. She saved my daughter's life. Kendra saw faces changing. Doctor. Kowalski's hand rising to her mouth. Darius beside her, his jaw tight with something that looked like shame. The donors shifting uncomfortably, champagne glasses forgotten. Theodore looked at Vanessa, at Darius. At the security badge still clipped to Kendra's scrubs. At the door she'd been seconds from being pushed through. When he turned back to Kendra, his expression held something fierce and protective. Why, he asked, his voice carrying across the silent lobby. Were you being escorted out of your own hospital? Kendra's voice came out steady. Which surprised her. After everything, after the escort and the accusations and the eyes watching her shame, her voice didn't shake. I just wanted to see it, she said, and the words felt small in the vast lobby. I've worked here 6 years. 6 years in the ICU, double shifts most weeks, and I just wanted to feel like I was part of it. Part of the hospital. Not just the person who empties bedpans and holds hands when patients are dying. She looked at Theodore. Then at the crowd behind him. I couldn't afford the ticket. $500 is what I spend on groceries for a month. It's my car insurance. It's the reason my son's wearing shoes that are too small, because I haven't been able to replace them yet. Theodore's jaw tightened. The muscle there jumped once, twice. You couldn't afford the ticket. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. No, sir. So you came during your break to look. Yes, sir. I wasn't trying to crash the party or steal anything. I just wanted to see what it looked like, the ballroom, the people. I wanted to see the hospital I work for celebrate something. Kendra's hands found each other, fingers interlacing. Ms. Hartwell saw me in the lobby. She asked if I had a ticket. When I said no, she called security. Vanessa stepped forward, her heels clicking sharp against marble. Mr. Bancroft, if I may explain the situation from an operational perspective, please do. Theodore's voice could have frozen champagne. The gala is an exclusive event. Our donors pay $500 per ticket because they expect a certain caliber of guest, a certain atmosphere. We have protocols to protect that experience. Vanessa's hands gestured as she spoke, diamonds catching light. Anyone could walk in off the street and claim to work at the hospital. We have 2,000 employees. I can't be expected to recognize everyone, and our donors deserve security. They deserve to know that the people in that ballroom belong there. She was wearing scrubs. Theodore said quietly. Which anyone could purchase. Scrubs aren't exactly. She had a hospital badge. Those can be faked, Mr. Bancroft, in this day and age we have to be vigilant about, so you assume she was lying. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed. I was protecting the integrity of the event. The integrity. Theodore repeated the word like he was tasting something rotten. He turned to Darius, who stood 3 feet behind Kendra, his security badge catching light. What's your name? Darius Whitmore, sir. You know she works here, Theodore gestured to Kendra. Darius's shoulders sagged. He nodded. Yes, sir, I've seen Nurse Osei in the ICU. I do rounds on the 4th floor sometimes, and you were escorting her out anyway. The silence stretched. Kendra watched Darius's face, saw the shame there, the weight of it. I was told too, sir. Ms. Hartwell said she was trespassing. And I was told to escort her to the exit. You were told to. Theodore's voice had gone soft, which somehow made it more terrible. He turned to the crowd, scanning faces. Dr. Kowalski. Step forward, please. A woman in an emerald gown moved through the crowd, her face pale. Kendra recognized her immediately. Dr. Kowalski, her supervisor. The doctor who'd praised her patient care just last week, who'd written exemplary clinical judgment in her last evaluation. Dr. Kowalski, you work with Nurse Osei, correct? Yes, the word came out hoarse. In the ICU, yes, Mr. Bancroft, so you knew she was telling the truth when she said she worked here, Doctor. Kowalski's hand rose to her throat, touched the emerald pendant there. Yes, and you said nothing. Dr. Kowalski's eyes found Kendra's, then dropped. I didn't know what to say. I thought maybe there was some misunderstanding. Some reason a nurse would be escorted out of her own hospital. Theodore's voice was rising now. Carrying across the lobby, bouncing off marble and glass. Some reason that would make it acceptable to stand there in your $500 gown and watch a colleague be humiliated. Kendra saw faces in the crowd changing. Donors shifting weight from foot to foot, administrators staring at the floor. The woman in the silver dress who'd whispered about theft now had her hand over her mouth. Theodore turned in a slow circle, taking in the gathered crowd. 50 people, maybe more, doctors and donors and foundation board members. The hospital's elite, the people who funded wings and endowed chairs and had their names on plaques. So an entire crowd of hospital staff and donors watched a nurse be humiliated. Theodore said, his voice sharp enough to cut. And no one said a word. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the held-breath silence of watching something unfold. This was the silence of collective shame, of people realizing they'd failed some fundamental test of humanity. She was in scrubs, Theodore continued. She had a hospital badge. She told you she worked here, and instead of verifying, instead of showing basic human decency, you assumed she was lying. You assumed she was stealing. You called security, and you watched her get escorted out like a criminal. His gaze landed on Vanessa. And you talk about protecting your donor's experience, about maintaining a certain caliber of guest. What caliber is that exactly? The caliber that saves lives. Because that's what Nurse Osei does, she saves lives. Or the caliber that writes checks. Vanessa's face had gone blotchy, red patches spreading across her foundation. Mr. Bancroft, I was simply doing my job, your job. Theodore stepped closer to her. You need to understand what you've done. Let me tell you about the woman you just humiliated. Theodore stepped forward, and the ballroom seemed to hold its breath. His hand trembled slightly as he reached up to loosen his bow tie. A gesture so small, yet so human, that it cut through the formality of the moment. Let me tell you about July 18th, he said, his voice quieter now. But somehow it carried further than when he'd been shouting. 3 months ago, a Thursday evening, around 7:30, Kendra felt her chest tighten. She remembered that day, of course she remembered. My daughter Sloane had driven herself to a checkup at this hospital, Theodore continued. Routine appointment, she was 16, healthy, captain of her soccer team. She'd just gotten her driver's license 2 months before. And I was so proud of how responsible she was being, scheduling her own appointments. Managing her own health care. His voice caught, and he paused, composing himself. The crowd was motionless. She made it to the parking lot. She never made it inside. Theodore's eyes were wet now, reflecting the chandelier light. An undiagnosed cardiac arrhythmia. Her heart just stopped. She collapsed between 2 cars. And if the timing had been different by even 5 minutes, if the right person hadn't been in the right place, he couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I got the call at my office. They told me my daughter was being transported to the ER, that someone had performed CPR, that she had a pulse. I broke every traffic law getting here. I ran through those doors thinking I might have lost her. Thinking about what I'd say at her funeral, what I'd do with her room. How I'd survive it. Kendra's own eyes were burning. She remembered Theodore's face that night, the terror in it, the way he'd gripped her hands so hard it hurt. And when I got to the ER, Theodore said, his voice breaking completely now. My daughter was on a gurney, and there was a stranger in scrubs holding her hand. This stranger. This woman you just escorted out of here like a criminal. He turned to look at Kendra. And the gratitude in his face was so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. She was talking to Sloane, even though Sloane was barely conscious. Telling her she was safe, that her father was coming, that she'd done so well. And when I came running in, probably looking half insane, she stood up and she took both my hands, and she looked me right in the eyes. Theodore's voice steadied, taking on the cadence of words he'd memorized, words that had sustained him. She told me, your daughter is strong, she fought hard. You raised a fighter. Those words kept me breathing. Those words kept me standing when every part of me wanted to collapse. Those words got me through the next 6 hours of tests and monitors and waiting to see if Sloane would be okay. Vanessa's face had drained of all color. She looked like she might be sick. I asked her name, Theodore said. She told me Kendra, just Kendra. I asked what department she worked in so I could thank her supervisor, send a letter, something. She said it wasn't necessary. She said she was just glad she was there. She stayed 2 hours past the end of her shift, making sure Sloane was stable. Checking on us, bringing me coffee. He paused. And something shifted in his expression, a flash of anger cutting through the grief. What I learned later, what she never told me, was that she had to pick up her son from aftercare. That aftercare closed at 7, that by the time she left the hospital, it was past 9. That she incurred a $50 late fee she couldn't afford because she stayed to make sure my daughter lived. Kendra heard gasps from the crowd. She felt her face grow hot. That late fee had meant choosing between buying Caleb new shoes or paying the electric bill on time. She'd never told anyone about it. How did Theodore know? $50, Theodore repeated, his voice hard. A fee that probably meant something to her family's budget. And she never mentioned it, never asked for anything. Never even gave her last name. He pulled out his phone, his hands still shaking slightly, and turned it toward the crowd. On the screen was a photo of a young girl with soft brown hair and bright eyes, smiling at the camera, very much alive. This is my daughter now, Theodore said. This is what Kendra gave me. Sloane is a senior in high school. She's applying to colleges. She has an implanted defibrillator, and she can't play soccer anymore, but she's alive. She laughs, she argues with me about curfew, she complains about homework. She exists in the world because the woman you just humiliated dropped her bag in a parking lot and refused to stop doing chest compressions for 8 minutes straight. His voice rose. Filling the ballroom. I have spent 3 months trying to find her. I knew her first name. I knew she worked here. I had my assistant call every department. But there are hundreds of nurses at this hospital. And she never submitted an incident report, never asked for recognition, never made herself known. I was going to announce a search tonight. I was going to offer a reward. He turned slowly, taking in the entire crowd, and his expression was pure contempt. And tonight, we charged her $500 to celebrate the hospital she serves with everything she has. Tonight, we watched her get accused of theft and trespassing. Tonight, we stood silent while she was escorted out by security. Theodore's gaze landed on Vanessa. And she actually took a step backward. You asked what she was doing here, he said softly, dangerously. She was trying to feel like she belonged. In the hospital where she saves lives. Where she saved my daughter's life, the silence was absolute. Kendra could hear her own heartbeat, could feel tears on her cheeks that she didn't remember shedding. Theodore pulled out his phone again, this time holding it to his ear. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. All of it. He turned away from the crowd, his jaw set. "Robert. It's Theodore Bancroft. I need an emergency board meeting, tonight." Now Theodore's phone call ended with a single word. Now he turned back to the crowd, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "Board members, lobby, immediately." 5 people detached from the ballroom crowd like stones pulled by gravity. Dr. Patricia Nguyen, Chief of Surgery. Robert Castellano, CFO. Marion Webb, Community Representative. James Rothstein, Legal Counsel, Dr. Marcus Hayes, Chief Medical Officer. They formed a tight circle near the registration desk, their formal wear incongruous against the institutional backdrop. Kendra stood at the periphery, still flanked by Darius, feeling like she was watching herself from somewhere outside her body. Theodore didn't waste time on preamble. Vanessa Hartwell's employment with Metropolitan General Hospital ends now. Effective immediately. Darius, please escort Ms. Hartwell to her office to collect her personal belongings, then off the premises. The words landed like a gavel. Vanessa's face went from pale to crimson. "You can't, Theodore, I was doing my job. I was protecting the integrity of, you humiliated a nurse who saved my daughter's life." Theodore's voice was ice. "You accused her of theft and trespassing in her own workplace. You performed cruelty for an audience." He glanced at Darius. "Please." Darius stepped away from Kendra, and the reversal was so complete, so cinematically perfect, that Kendra almost couldn't process it. Vanessa Hartwell, in her designer gown and diamond earrings, walked the same path Kendra had just walked. Past the registration desk, past the balloon arch, past the silent witnesses who had watched Kendra's humiliation with the same frozen expressions they wore now. But where Kendra had walked in shock and shame, Vanessa walked in fury, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. "This is outrageous," Vanessa hissed as she passed. "I have a contract. I have donor relationships. You can't just—" "We can," Theodore said quietly. And we did. The lobby doors closed behind them. The silence that followed felt different than before. Heavier, ashamed, Theodore turned to face the crowd that had gathered at the ballroom entrance. Doctors in tuxedos, donors in gowns, hospital administrators in their formal best. All of them watching now, too late. "Your silence told Nurse Osei she didn't matter," Theodore said, his voice carrying across the marble. "Every single one of you who stood there and watched, every colleague who knew her, every administrator who looked away, your silence was complicity. That changes tonight." Dr. Kowalski moved first, breaking away from the crowd like someone waking from a trance. She approached Kendra with her emerald gown rustling, her face stricken. "I should have said something," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "Kendra, I'm so sorry. I knew you. I work with you. I should have said something." Kendra looked at her supervisor. This woman who had praised her clinical judgment 100 times, but hadn't spoken when it mattered. She nodded slowly, but she didn't say it was okay. She didn't absolve. Some silences couldn't be undone with apologies. Dr. Kowalski seemed to understand. She stepped back, and the shame on her face was raw and real. Theodore moved closer to Kendra, his expression softening. "The gala will continue," he announced to the assembled crowd, though his eyes stayed on her. "But not as planned. Tonight's guest of honor will be Nurse Kendra Osei. And effective immediately, I'm refunding every ticket purchased for this event. That money, all of it, will establish the Kendra Osei Nursing Appreciation Fund. For scholarships, for childcare support. For the people who actually keep this hospital running." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed approval, others showed calculation, already adjusting to the new reality. Kendra felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing, pressing against her chest. "Mr. Bancroft," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. I appreciate what you're doing. But I can't be anyone's guest of honor right now." Theodore's eyebrows rose slightly. Kendra, I need to check on my patients first. She touched her badge. That small piece of plastic that Vanessa had dismissed as fake. I have a shift. Mrs. Patterson in 4C gets anxious at night. Mr. Diallo needs his medications adjusted. I've been gone for 20 minutes, and I need to make sure they're okay. The simplicity of it seemed to hit Theodore like a revelation. Here he was, orchestrating institutional change, redirecting hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the woman at the center of it all just wanted to get back to work. Just wanted to do her job, the job she'd been doing all along, invisible and essential. Of course, Theodore said quietly, then louder, to the board members still clustered nearby. We'll reconvene in 1 hour, conference room C. I want a full review of ticketing policies, staff inclusion protocols, and event accessibility. This never happens again. Kendra turned toward the corridor that led back to the ICU. Back to the fluorescent lights and beeping monitors and patients who needed her. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble. She was so tired. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving only the bone-deep exhaustion of a double shift and an emotional earthquake. She made it 3 steps before Theodore's voice stopped her. Kendra, wait. There's someone who wants to meet you. She turned back, and the crowd parted like a curtain drawing open. A girl stepped out from the ballroom, 16, maybe 17, soft brown hair. Gray eyes that mirrored Theodore's. She wore a simple black dress, and she was crying, and Kendra knew who she was before Theodore said her name. This is Sloane, he said, his voice thick with emotion. My daughter. The embrace happened before either of them made a conscious decision. Sloane crossed the marble floor in 3 quick steps, and Kendra's arms opened automatically, the way they did when Caleb had nightmares. And then they were holding each other in the middle of the lobby, while 300 people in evening wear watched in silence. Sloane was crying. Kendra could feel the girl's shoulders shaking, could feel her own tears soaking into the soft fabric of Sloane's dress. The girl was taller than she'd been in the parking lot, healthier. Substantial in a way she hadn't been when she collapsed against the asphalt with her lips turning blue. Kendra's hands found the back of Sloane's head, cradling it the way she'd cradled it 3 months ago while counting compressions, while breathing life back into lungs that had stopped working. Nobody spoke. The lobby had gone cathedral quiet. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. When Sloane finally pulled back, her mascara was running and she didn't care. I wanted to find you, she said, her voice thick. To say thank you. I didn't even know your last name. Dad had to call the hospital and describe you and ask who was working that day, and they wouldn't tell him because of privacy rules, and we thought we'd never. Her voice broke. I thought I'd never get to tell you what you gave me. Kendra reached up and wiped a tear from Sloane's cheek with her thumb. A gesture so maternal it made Theodore's throat tighten. You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. Yes, I do. Sloane grabbed Kendra's hands, held them tight. Do you know what I get to do because of you? I got to go to homecoming. I got to fight with my dad about curfew. I'm applying to colleges. I'm going to have a life. And you gave me that. I was just doing what anyone would. No, Sloane's voice was fierce now. The tears still coming, but her eyes sharp. You were exhausted. Dad found out later you'd worked a double shift. You were late picking up your son. You did it anyway. You stayed. You saved me when you had every reason to just go home. Kendra felt something crack open in her chest. She'd thought about that day so many times. Thought about Caleb waiting at aftercare, about the late fee she'd had to pay, about the way her knees had ached for days afterward from kneeling on concrete. She'd never thought about it the way Sloane was describing it. Never gave herself credit for the choice to stay. Can I see? Kendra asked softly, touching her own chest. Sloane nodded and pulled down the neckline of her dress just slightly. There it was. A small scar, maybe 2 inches long, just below her collarbone. The mark where they'd implanted the defibrillator that would keep her heart beating if it ever tried to stop again. Kendra's fingers hovered over it, not quite touching. You're taking care of yourself, following up with cardiology. Every month, doctor. Patel says I'm doing great. Sloane smiled through her tears. Because of you, I get to have a life to take care of. Kendra, the voice cut through the moment like a knife. Regina was pushing through the crowd, her face a storm of fury and concern. Still in her scrubs because she'd clearly run straight from the ICU when she'd heard what happened. She stopped when she saw Sloane, when she saw Theodore, when she registered what she was witnessing. "Oh," Regina said, her anger deflating into understanding. "Oh, baby," she pulled Kendra into a hug, fierce and protective, and whispered in her ear. "I heard what that woman did to you. I heard everything. I'm okay," Kendra whispered back. "You shouldn't have to be okay. You should be furious." "I am," Kendra pulled back, met her friend's eyes. "But I'm also tired, Regina. I'm so tired." Theodore stepped forward, and the crowd seemed to lean in with him. He was holding a microphone, the one the event coordinator had been using for announcements. "Kendra, I know you've been through an ordeal tonight. But these people need to hear from you. They need to understand what happened here, what it means. Would you say a few words?" Kendra looked at the microphone. Looked at the crowd of donors and administrators and colleagues in their gowns and tuxedos. Looked at the ballroom beyond, where tables were set with centerpieces that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. She thought about what she could say. Thought about the speech she could give about dignity and respect, and the essential workers who keep hospitals running while executives take credit. But then she thought about Mrs. Patterson in 4C, who got anxious when the night shift changed. About Mr. Diallo, whose medication timing was critical. About the 17 other patients in the ICU who needed her. Who didn't care about galas or speeches or institutional reform. Who just needed a nurse who showed up and did her job with competence and care. "I appreciate the offer," Kendra said quietly, "but I have patients who need me. That's where I belong." She saw something flash across Theodore's face. Respect, maybe, or recognition that this was exactly why she was worth fighting for. Kendra turned toward the corridor that led back to the ICU. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble, that sound that had marked her as an intruder 20 minutes ago. She was so ready to be back under fluorescent lights, back where things made sense. She made it 5 steps before she heard it, a single pair of hands clapping. Then another, then a dozen. The sound built like a wave, growing louder and louder until the entire lobby was applauding. And when Kendra glanced back, she saw them rising from their seats in the ballroom. Standing, their hands coming together in an ovation that echoed off the marble and the chandeliers and the hospital foundation plaques on the walls. Kendra didn't stop walking. The applause followed her down the corridor, fading as she moved deeper into the hospital, back toward the world she knew. Theodore caught up with her at the ICU doors. "Kendra, wait." She turned, her hand already on the badge reader. "This isn't over," he said. "We have work to do." Kendra looked at him for a long moment. Saw the determination in his eyes, the same fierce protectiveness he'd shown when defending her in the lobby. She thought about Sloane's scar, about the life she'd saved, about the system that had tried to erase her. She nodded once, "I know." Then she swiped her badge and disappeared through the doors, back to the beeping monitors and the patients who needed her, back to the work that had always mattered more than recognition. Monday morning, the nurses' station looked like a funeral home. Bouquets crowded every surface, roses, lilies, carnations in cellophane wrapping. Cards were taped to the desk, the computer monitors, the supply cart. Kendra stopped in the doorway, her badge still swinging from the lanyard around her neck. "What is this?" she asked. Regina looked up from charting, her expression unreadable. "They started arriving Saturday, delivery drivers every hour." Kendra approached slowly, picking up the nearest card. The handwriting was elegant, unfamiliar, to the nurse who shows us what real heroism looks like. "Thank you for your service." She set it down, her hands trembling slightly. Picked up another. "You deserved better. I'm sorry I didn't speak up. There's like 50 of them," Regina said quietly. Maybe more. Kendra felt something tighten in her chest. She didn't want flowers. She wanted the moment in the lobby to unhappen. She wanted to rewind to Thursday night when she'd considered staying home. Choosing the safety of invisibility over the risk of being seen. I just want to work, she said, but work was impossible, doctor. Martinez stopped her in the hallway to apologize. A respiratory therapist she barely knew hugged her near the medication room. A patient's daughter recognized her from the video and started crying. Saying Kendra reminded her of her own mother, who'd worked as a nursing assistant for 30 years and never got thanked once. The video, Kendra had watched it only once, on Sunday night after Caleb went to bed. Someone had leaked the security footage, multiple angles, crystal clear. The timestamp showed 9:47 p.m. There she was in her scrubs, looking small and tired. There was Vanessa, performatively outraged. There was the crowd, silent and complicit. And there was Theodore, stepping forward like divine intervention. Regina had texted her the view count Sunday afternoon, 500,000. By Monday morning, it was 2.3 million and climbing. The hashtag #Kendra was trending. Healthcare workers across the country were sharing their own stories. The doctor who'd been questioned for using the physician parking lot because security assumed she was a housekeeper. The male nurse told he couldn't possibly be smart enough for medical school. The janitor who'd saved a choking patient and never received acknowledgement. Kendra's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Interview requests from local news, national morning shows, podcasts about healthcare inequality. She declined them all with the same message: I'm not the story. The system is the story. Tuesday afternoon, Darius appeared in the ICU break room while Kendra was microwaving leftovers. He stood in the doorway, his security uniform perfectly pressed, his hands clasped in front of him like a penitent. Nurse Osei, he said. Do you have a minute? Kendra nodded, though her lunch break was only 15 minutes and she'd already used 5. I wanted to apologize, Darius said. For Friday night, I should have said something. Should have told Vanessa you were staff. I knew who you were and I stayed silent. Kendra studied his face. Saw genuine remorse there, the weight of complicity he'd been carrying for 4 days. She thought about his wife, about the health insurance he couldn't risk losing. About how the system made cowards of good people by threatening their survival. I understand why you didn't, she said. The same system that humiliated me would have fired you for defending me. That doesn't make it right, no. Kendra agreed. It doesn't, she let the silence sit for a moment, then asked the question that mattered. When will you speak up? Darius met her eyes. Next time, he said, I promise you. Next time, Wednesday morning, Dr. Kowalski called a department meeting. The ICU physicians and nurses gathered in the conference room, coffee cups in hand, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Kowalski stood at the head of the table, her posture rigid. I need to address what happened Friday, she began. Many of you saw the video. You saw Kendra being humiliated. You saw me standing there in my gown, doing nothing. Her voice cracked slightly. I failed as a colleague, as a physician, as a human being. I watched someone I work with every day get treated like a criminal. And I protected my comfort over her dignity. Kendra sat very still. Her hands folded on the table. I've enrolled in advocacy training through the Nursing Alliance, Kowalski continued. And I'm committed to speaking up every time, no matter the cost. She looked directly at Kendra. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Kendra nodded once. Acceptance, not absolution. Thursday, the hospital-wide email arrived. Board Chairman Theodore Bancroft was calling a mandatory town hall for Friday at 2 p.m. Subject, institutional culture, and immediate policy changes. Friday afternoon, the auditorium was packed, every seat filled, staff lining the walls, crowding the doorways. Nurses in scrubs, physicians in white coats, housekeeping staff in their uniforms. Administrative assistants, lab technicians. The cafeteria workers who'd watched the gala from behind the kitchen doors. Kendra sat in the back row, Regina beside her. Theodore took the stage, no podium, no notes. Just a man in a business suit, facing a room full of people who kept the hospital running. Last Friday, he said, this institution failed one of its finest employees. We celebrated wealth while degrading the woman who saved my daughter's life. That ends today. The room was absolutely silent. Effective immediately, all hospital events will be accessible to all staff, regardless of income. We're implementing mandatory bias training for all administrators and security personnel. We're creating an employee advocacy board with nurse representation. And we're conducting a comprehensive salary equity review. Scattered applause began building. Theodore held up his hand, but policies aren't enough. We need cultural change. We need leadership that understands the people who do the hardest work are often the least visible. He paused, scanning the crowd until he found Kendra. We're not just changing policies, we're changing leadership. And I want Nurse Osei to help us do it. Every head turned. Kendra felt Regina's hand grip her arm, felt the weight of 2,000 eyes. Theodore's voice carried across the auditorium. Will you? The conference room on the executive floor was nothing like the cramped break rooms where Kendra usually grabbed her meals between patients. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, mahogany table, leather chairs. Theodore sat across from her, no desk between them, his posture open and waiting. Thank you for meeting with me, he said. I know the town hall was public, but this conversation needed to be private. Kendra's hands rested in her lap. Fingers intertwined to keep them still. She'd worn clean scrubs, but they were still scrubs. Still marked her as someone who belonged on a different floor. Director of Nursing Culture and Equity, Theodore continued. It's a newly created position, executive level. You'd report directly to the hospital CEO and to me. Your mandate would be reshaping how this institution treats and values its nursing staff. He slid a folder across the table. Kendra opened it, her eyes caught on the salary line and stopped breathing. Triple what she made now. I need someone who understands what it's like to be invisible in this system, Theodore said. Someone who's lived it. Someone who won't accept policy changes on paper while the culture stays rotten underneath. Kendra's throat felt tight. Mr. Bancroft, I'm not qualified for this. I don't have an MBA. I don't have management experience. I'm just a nurse. Theodore leaned forward, his gray eyes sharp. Just a nurse. You saved my daughter's life with your hands and your training. You've kept critically ill patients alive through 12-hour shifts on inadequate staffing. You couldn't afford to attend a party at your own hospital. And when they humiliated you for it, you held your head up with more dignity than anyone in that ballroom. His voice grew quieter. More intense. You're exactly qualified. You know what needs to change because you've survived what's broken. I love patient care. Kendra said, and her voice cracked. I love being at the bedside. This feels like leaving them behind. You'd be fighting for every nurse who's ever felt invisible, Theodore said. Every aide who's been talked over, every tech who's been blamed for systemic failures. You wouldn't be leaving patient care, you'd be protecting the people who provide it. Kendra looked down at the folder. At the number that would mean Caleb could have new shoes without her calculating which bill to pay late. At the title that would put her name on the same organizational chart as the people who'd watched her get escorted out. Can I have time to think? Take all the time you need. That night, Kendra sat on the worn couch in her apartment, Caleb curled against her side. His math homework was spread on the coffee table next to the stack of bills she'd been sorting. The drawing he'd made last month was stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. Her in scrubs with a cape, surrounded by hearts. Baby, I need to talk to you about something, she said. Caleb looked up, his eyes so much like hers. Are you in trouble? No, honey. The opposite, Mr. Bancroft, Sloane's dad. He offered me a new job at the hospital. Would you still be a nurse? I'd still work at the hospital. But I wouldn't take care of patients anymore. I'd help make things better for all the nurses, make sure they're treated fairly. Make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing. Would you make more money? The question hurt because he was 8 and already understood their financial reality too well. Yes, then you should do it. He said it simply, like the answer was obvious. But I love being a nurse. I love helping people get better. Caleb sat up, serious. Mommy, you always say helping one person is good, but helping everyone is better. If you take this job, you'd help all the nurses, right? And then they can help all their patients. That's helping everyone. Kendra pulled him close, pressing her face against his hair. When had her baby become so wise? The next afternoon, Regina cornered her in the ICU break room. You're still thinking about it, how do you know? Because you've been staring at that same patient chart for 10 minutes without writing anything. Regina sat down across from her, arms folded. What's holding you back? I don't know if I'm the right person. There are nurses with more experience, more education, more. Stop. Regina's voice was sharp. Stop making yourself small. They don't deserve your humility. They deserve your truth. You know what's wrong with this place because you've lived it. You know what needs to change because you've bled for it. That man offered you power. Take it and use it. What if I fail? What if you don't? What if you actually change things? What if 5 years from now, some other single mother nurse doesn't have to choose between paying rent and feeling like she belongs at her own workplace? Regina reached across the table, gripped Kendra's hand. You've been invisible long enough. Let them see you. That night, Kendra stood in her small bathroom, her worn scrubs folded on the counter. Navy blue, faded from years of industrial washing. Coffee stain on the left pocket she could never quite get out. The fabric was soft, broken in, familiar as her own skin, on the counter beside them. The stack of bills, rent, utilities, Caleb's after-school program. Student loans that never seemed to shrink, and next to those, Caleb's drawing. Her with a cape, a superhero, she thought about every nurse she'd worked with. Every aide, every tech. Every person who kept the hospital running while administrators planned galas they couldn't afford to attend. She thought about the silence in that ballroom, the complicity. The system that made her humiliation possible. She picked up her phone. Theodore answered on the second ring. Kendra, I'll take the job, she said. Her voice was steady, on one condition: the office still smelled like fresh paint. Kendra stood in the doorway, briefcase in one hand, her other gripping the strap of her worn canvas bag. Director of Nursing Culture and Equity. The nameplate gleamed on the door, letters crisp and official. Inside, a desk made of actual wood, a window overlooking the city. A chair that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. She set her briefcase down but didn't sit. Instead, she walked back out, took the elevator down 3 floors, and found her locker in the ICU staff room. She hung her scrubs inside, smoothed the fabric, navy blue, faded, familiar. The coffee stain still there on the left pocket. Keeping your options open, Regina appeared beside her, arms crossed, smiling. 1 shift a week, Kendra said. That was the condition. I'm not losing touch with what this is really about. They're going to hate that, I know. The first administrative meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Kendra arrived early, printed copies of her proposal, arranged them neatly at each seat. Policy changes, mandatory breaks for 12-hour shifts, transparent salary scales. Protected time for nursing education, respect protocols, the administrators filed in. Richard Chen from Finance, Patricia Odom from Human Resources, Dr. Marcus Webb, Chief Medical Officer. They nodded at Kendra, polite but distant. Then took their seats and glanced at her documents with the expression of people forced to read something they'd already decided to ignore. Thank you all for coming, Kendra began. Her voice sounded too loud in her own ears. I've outlined some initial priorities for improving nursing culture and retention. Richard flipped through the pages. Barely reading. These would require significant budget reallocation. The turnover costs more, Kendra said. We're losing experienced nurses every month. That's not how we've done things. Patricia said, her tone pleasant but final. These kinds of changes require years of committee review, union negotiations. Board approval. The board chairman created this position, Kendra said. He wants change. Mr. Bancroft is passionate, Dr. Webb said, leaning back in his chair, but operational realities are complex. We'll take your suggestions under advisement, The phrase hung in the air like a door closing. The next meeting was worse. Kendra proposed standardized respect protocols, training for physicians on collaborative communication with nursing staff. Dr. Webb cut her off mid-sentence. "With all due respect," he said, and Kendra heard the blade hidden in those words. "Clinical decisions are made by physicians. This is a medical issue, not a nursing issue. Patient care is everyone's issue," Kendra said. Of course, his smile was thin, but there's a hierarchy for a reason. We can't have every nurse second-guessing treatment plans. That's not what I'm suggesting, isn't it? He gathered his papers. Stood. "I have rounds." The room emptied. Kendra sat alone at the conference table, her printed proposals scattered like dead leaves. The resistance came from below, too. In the ICU break room, Kendra overheard two nurses she'd worked beside for years. "Must be nice," one said, voice sharp with something that sounded like betrayal. "Get humiliated on camera, get a promotion. Triple salary for what?" Sitting in meetings, while we're still short-staffed, still drowning, Kendra stood in the doorway. They saw her, didn't apologize, just walked past with faces carefully blank. Regina found her later, gripping her shoulder. "They're scared. Change means someone's getting comfortable. And comfortable people don't want to move. I thought they'd want this." Kendra said. "I thought they'd be glad someone was finally fighting for us." They are. And they're also angry it took a viral video instead of 6 years of competence. Give them time, but time felt like the one thing Kendra didn't have. The mandatory respect training she'd organized was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Required attendance for all staff. She'd worked with HR to make it official, carved out 2 hours, arranged coverage. 40 people were supposed to come, 19 showed up. Half of them spent the session on their phones, responding to emails, barely looking up when the facilitator asked questions. Dr. Webb attended for exactly 12 minutes. Then excused himself for an emergency that Kendra later learned was a scheduled golf game. She stood at the back of the room, watching her initiative die in real time. Watching people fulfill the letter of the requirement while murdering its spirit. That evening, she knocked on Theodore's office door. He looked up from his desk, saw her face, and immediately stood. "Sit," he said. "Tell me, I don't know if I can do this." The words came out broken. "They don't respect me. The administrators think I'm naive. The physicians think I'm overstepping. Even some of the nurses think I'm a sellout. Nothing's changing. I'm shouting into a void." Theodore walked around his desk. Pulled up a chair beside her instead of across from her. "They didn't respect you in scrubs either," he said quietly. "But you saved lives anyway. This is just a different kind of life-saving. Harder, slower, less immediate, but no less vital. I knew how to save lives in the ICU. I don't know how to save a culture." "Yes, you do. You're just doing it without the manual, without the protocols, without anyone telling you the correct dosage. But you know what's sick, you know what healing looks like. And you know that real change doesn't happen in weeks. It happens in years of relentless, exhausting work that nobody thanks you for until it's done." Kendra closed her eyes. Felt the weight of every meeting, every dismissal, every polite erasure. "How long did it take?" she asked. "For what? For people to stop fighting you?" Theodore smiled, sad and knowing. "I'll let you know when it happens." She left his office as the sun set, walked back to her own. The new space still felt foreign, like wearing someone else's coat. She gathered her things, locked the door, something white on the floor. A piece of paper, folded once, slipped under the door while she'd been gone. Kendra picked it up, unfolded it. The handwriting was anonymous, careful, deliberately untraceable. "You don't belong here. Go back to bedpans." She stood in the empty hallway, holding the note. Feeling the familiar weight of invisibility settling back over her shoulders like an old, suffocating blanket, the note was waiting on her desk when she arrived Monday morning. White paper folded into a precise rectangle. Kendra picked it up already knowing, her stomach turning before she even opened it. Diversity hire, 2 words, carefully printed, anonymous. She crumpled it without thinking, threw it toward the trash can, missed. The paper ball sat on the floor like an accusation. Kendra stared at it for a long moment, then picked it up and threw it away properly. Professional, controlled, like the note hadn't just confirmed what some part of her had always feared people were thinking. 6 months of meetings that went nowhere, initiatives that stalled in committee, polite smiles that meant nothing. 6 months of being the problem instead of solving problems. She grabbed her bag. Tuesday meant her ICU shift, the one thing that still made sense. The emergency department called up the admission at 3 in the afternoon. 22-year-old female, overdose, intentional. Nursing student from the university program, doing clinical rotations at Metropolitan General. Kendra took the assignment without hesitation. The young woman looked impossibly small in the ICU bed. Dark hair spread across the pillow, skin pale against the white sheets. IV lines, cardiac monitor, the mechanical rhythm of modern medicine keeping someone alive who decided she didn't want to be. Her name was Maya Chen, third-year nursing student. Clinical instructor had sent her home early yesterday for crying during rounds. The suicide note was in her chart, hospital protocol, evidence. Words written in careful handwriting on notebook paper. Kendra read it standing at the nurse's station, and something inside her chest cracked open. I'm invisible, I don't matter. They treat me like I'm stupid, like I'm in the way, like my questions are annoying and my presence is tolerated at best. My preceptor rolls her eyes when I ask for clarification. The residents talk over me like I'm not there. I made a mistake with medication documentation, and the attending physician called me incompetent in front of the entire team. I can't do this. I thought I wanted to be a nurse, but I can't survive in a system that treats people like me as disposable. I should just quit, except quitting feels like dying too, so maybe this is easier. Kendra read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the chart with hands that shook. She knew these words. Had felt them in her bones during every double shift, every dismissal, every moment of being talked over and talked past. The only difference was she had Caleb, a reason to keep showing up even when showing up felt like self-erasure. Maya didn't have that yet. Maya only had the system's contempt and her own despair. Kendra pulled a chair to Maya's bedside and sat down, waited. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm, the ventilator breathed for her. Modern medicine performing its miracles on someone who'd stopped believing in them. Maya's eyes opened at 4:30, confused, then aware, then devastated. Kendra leaned forward. Hey, I'm Kendra, I'm your nurse today. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She tried to turn her face away. You matter, Kendra said quietly. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere that still believed despite everything. You matter so much, and I'm going to make sure they know it. Maya's monitors showed her heart rate climbing. She was crying now, silent tears running down into her hair. I know what they did to you, Kendra continued. I know how they made you feel. And I'm going to tell you something true. It's not you, it was never you. The system is sick, but you're not disposable, you're not incompetent. You're a nursing student who asked questions because you cared about doing it right. That's not weakness, that's exactly who we need. Maya's hand moved slightly on the bed. Kendra took it, held it gently. I need you to stay, she said. I need you to recover, and then I need you to tell your story. Because people like us. We have to stop disappearing quietly. She stayed until Maya fell asleep again. Then walked out of the ICU and directly to the hospital's business office. Used the phone at an empty desk because her hands were shaking too hard to hold her cell. Sloan answered on the second ring. I need your help, Kendra said. And I need to stop playing nice. They met that night at Kendra's apartment. Sloan brought her laptop. Kendra brought 6 months of documentation she'd been collecting without quite knowing why. Anonymous staff surveys she'd distributed, exit interviews from nurses who'd quit. Incident reports filed and ignored. Every piece of evidence that Metropolitan General's culture was toxic, systemic, and protected. They worked until 2 in the morning. Sloan writing, Kendra providing context, both of them fueled by coffee and righteous anger. The report took shape like a diagnosis: symptoms, patterns, evidence, recommendations. "This is going to make people very uncomfortable," Sloan said, reading through the final draft. "Good," Kendra replied. "Comfortable people don't change." They published it Thursday morning. Uploaded it to the hospital's internal system, where every employee could access it. Comprehensive documentation of systemic failures, no individual names, just patterns. Data, truth. Then Sloan sent it to 3 local news outlets simultaneously. Kendra was in a budget meeting when her phone started buzzing, then buzzing again. Then continuously, text after text, email after email, the report was spreading. Her supervisor's assistant appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Osei, the board has called an emergency meeting. They're requesting your presence immediately." Kendra stood. Gathered her papers, felt every eye in the room on her. Her phone buzzed once more as she walked toward the boardroom. Theodore's text was brief: "Don't back down." She kept walking, heart pounding, toward whatever came next. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. 20-foot ceilings, mahogany paneling, a conference table that could seat 30. Every seat was filled when Kendra walked in, board members in expensive suits. Hospital executives she'd only seen in newsletters. Theodore at the head of the table, his face carefully neutral. The door closed behind her with a sound like a vault ceiling. "Ms. Osei." Gerald Chambers, vice chairman, didn't wait for her to sit. "You've embarrassed this institution, violated confidentiality protocols, published internal documents without authorization. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Kendra set her folder on the table. Her hands were steady now. She'd stopped shaking somewhere between the ICU and the elevator. "I published anonymous data that was already being ignored. The embarrassment isn't that the data exists. It's that it took a viral video and a public report for you to listen." A woman in pearls sucked in her breath. 2 men exchanged glances. "The data wasn't yours to share," another board member said. His nameplate read Dr. Harrison Chen, physician representative. "You've damaged our reputation, made us look negligent." "I documented negligence," Kendra said. "There's a difference." She opened her folder, 6 months of work in neat charts and graphs. Maya's story had crystallized everything, turned abstract problems into human consequences she could no longer ignore. Metropolitan General's nursing turnover rate is 40%. The national average is 18. We've lost 63 nurses in the past year alone. The cost of replacing a single ICU nurse is approximately $90,000. That's $5.7 million in turnover costs. She slid the first page across the table. Patient satisfaction scores have declined for 6 consecutive quarters, with complaints specifically mentioning staff rudeness and lack of communication. And we've paid out $400,000 in lawsuit settlements related to staff behavior in the past 18 months. She watched their faces. Some looked at the numbers, others looked away. "These aren't just statistics," Kendra continued. "Every number represents a person. A nurse who quit because she was sexually harassed by a physician and HR told her to be less sensitive. A patient who suffered a medication error because the overnight shift was understaffed and exhausted. A family who sued because their mother died alone while nurses were too overwhelmed to hold her hand. We're aware there are challenges," Gerald said. "But airing our problems publicly helps no one. Hiding them helps even less, Doctor." Chen leaned forward. His expression was cold, clinical. "Ms. Osei, you seem to misunderstand something fundamental. Nurses are replaceable. We can always hire more. There's a pipeline. Nursing schools graduate thousands every year." The room went silent. Someone actually gasped. Kendra felt something ignite in her chest. Months of measured responses, diplomatic language, careful navigation of institutional politics burned away. She leaned forward, matched his posture. "That student in the ICU this week." Her voice was quiet, precise. "Maya Chen, 22 years old. She attempted suicide Tuesday night. She's the 4th nursing student this year who tried to quit medicine permanently. Not transfer hospitals, not change specialties, quit entirely. Because the clinical rotation here broke something in her she's not sure she can fix. She looked directly at Dr. Chen. How many more can you afford to lose? Not financially, morally. How many bright, compassionate young people have to be destroyed before you consider that maybe the problem isn't the pipeline? It's the culture that treats them as disposable. Dr. Chen's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The report documents patterns, Kendra said, addressing the full board now. Disrespect, discrimination, retaliation against staff who speak up. These aren't isolated incidents, they're systemic. And systems don't change unless someone forces them to. A woman Kendra didn't recognize spoke up. What you're describing would require significant resources, training, oversight. Third-party audits. We're already operating on thin margins. You're operating on thin margins because you're hemorrhaging staff, Kendra said. $6 million in turnover costs, $400,000 in settlements. How much would prevention cost in comparison? Theodore cleared his throat. First time he'd spoken since she entered, Ms. Osei has submitted a comprehensive reform proposal. Anonymous reporting systems with third-party investigation. Mandatory respect and equity training for all staff, including physicians and executives. Regular culture audits and consequences. Actual consequences for staff who violate policies, regardless of their position or revenue generation. That last part is the issue. Someone muttered. That last part is the point, Theodore said. His voice had an edge Kendra had never heard. We hired Ms. Osei to change our culture. Culture change is uncomfortable. If we wanted comfortable, we should have hired a consultant to write a report we could ignore. Gerald shifted papers. The board needs to consider the optics, the legal implications, whether Ms. Osei's continued employment is viable given the controversy. Kendra felt her stomach drop. She'd known this was possible, prepared herself for it. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Then let me be clear, she said. If you want me to be quiet, fire me, but the problems will still be here. Maya will still be in the ICU. The next nursing student will still consider suicide. The patients will still suffer. Firing me doesn't fix anything. It just proves the report was right. Theodore stood. I'm calling for a vote. Full implementation of Ms. Osei's reform proposal, with budget allocation and board oversight. All in favor, hands rose slowly. Theodore, 3 others, 2 more, another. 8 hands total, opposed, 4 hands, Dr. Chen among them. The motion carries, Theodore said. Ms. Osei, you'll have full authority to implement these reforms. This board will receive quarterly progress reports. Kendra's nays felt weak. She'd won, barely. 8-4 wasn't a mandate. It was a warning that half this room would be watching for her to fail. Thank you, she managed. The meeting adjourned. Board members filed out without looking at her. Theodore gave her a small nod. She gathered her papers, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She was almost to the door when someone touched her arm. Dr. Lena Kowalski. Still in her white coat from rounds, her eyes were red. I voted for your reforms, Lena said quietly, and I want to help implement them. I should have helped sooner. I should have defended you at the gala. I didn't, and I'm ashamed. Let me do better now. The photographs lined the walls of Metropolitan General's lobby like a gallery of honor. Kendra Osei paused in front of one, a respiratory therapist named Marcus cradling a newborn he'd helped resuscitate. Beneath it his words, every breath matters. 5 years ago, these walls had been blank marble. Cold, now they told stories. Morning, Ms. Osei, a young resident called, jogging past. See you at the gala tonight, Kendra smiled. Wouldn't miss it. The words felt surreal even now. The annual Healthcare Heroes Recognition event bore little resemblance to the charity gala that had nearly destroyed her. No ticket prices, no velvet ropes, just an open invitation to every person who kept this hospital alive. She walked through the ICU corridor, her sneakers, newer now but still practical, squeaking against the linoleum. Nurses greeted her by name. A housekeeper stopped to show her photos of his daughter's graduation. Dr. Kowalski emerged from a patient room, grinning. Kendra, I need your eyes on the new orientation curriculum. The section on workplace dignity feels thin. I'll look tonight after the gala, Kendra promised. Bring Caleb by our table. Sloane's been asking about him. The gala's transformation had started with Theodore's ultimatum to the board. Celebrate the people who actually save lives, or find a new chairman. Donors now funded an event where surgeons in tuxedos mingled with environmental services staff in their best clothes. Where dietary aides sat beside department heads. Where the only hierarchy that mattered was shared humanity. Kendra arrived that evening in a simple navy dress, her natural hair styled in elegant twists. Caleb walked beside her, 13 now and nearly her height, wearing a button-down shirt he'd picked out himself. Mom, is that Dr. Chen? He pointed toward the ballroom entrance. It is. She voted against my reforms 5 years ago, then spent 3 years trying to prove me wrong. Then apologized and became one of our strongest advocates. Kendra squeezed his hand. People can change, baby, if we let them. Inside, the ballroom glowed with warm light. No assigned seating, no donor tables separated from staff sections. Darius Whitmore, now head of security, waved from across the room. Regina Moss stood near the buffet in a stunning kente print dress, laughing with a group of phlebotomists. Kendra, Sloane Bancroft appeared, wearing navy scrubs with a nursing school patch on the sleeve. Her face had lost its teenage softness, gained the focused intensity of someone learning to save lives. Can you believe I'm actually doing this? Learning chest compressions, reading EKGs, being extraordinary, Kendra finished. Like I knew you would, Theodore approached, silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. Ready for your speech, Kendra's stomach tightened. The National Healthcare Leadership Award sat on the stage, a crystal sculpture catching light. As ready as I'll ever be, when her name was called, Sloane walked her to the stage. Their embrace echoed another moment, a parking lot, a dying girl, a nurse who refused to walk away. The room erupted in applause. Kendra gripped the podium, looking out at faces she knew. Colleagues who'd stood beside her, administrators who'd resisted, then relented. Board members who'd voted 8-4, barely enough. 5 years ago, she began, a nursing student named Maya tried to end her life in the hospital parking garage. She survived. She graduated last spring. She's working in pediatrics now, and last month she told me she finally loves coming to work. Silence settled over the room. Attentive, respectful, Maya's story isn't about one person's resilience. It's about what happens when we build systems that crush people's spirits. Then wonder why they break. Kendra reached into her bag and pulled out her old scrubs. Navy faded, coffee stand. I keep these to remember that respect isn't something you earn by wearing the right clothes or affording the right ticket price. Respect is owed to every person who shows up to care for others. To every soul who walks through these doors seeking healing or offering it. She held the scrubs higher. These represent every nurse working 3 jobs to feed their kids. Every housekeeper keeping infection rates low. Every security guard learning to see people, not problems. Dignity isn't about what you wear. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone. The applause started softly, then built. Caleb stood, then Sloane, then the entire room. Theodore wiped his eyes. Afterward, Kendra changed back into scrubs, new ones. Issued by a hospital that now valued its nursing staff enough to provide adequate supplies. She walked to the ICU for her weekly shift, old habits, sacred rituals. Room 412 held a man in septic shock, his wife gripping the bedrail with white knuckles. Kendra took the woman's other hand. He's fighting, Kendra said softly. And we're fighting with him, you're not alone. The wife's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Kendra stayed, holding steady, doing what she'd always done best. Theodore watched from the hallway, remembering another parking lot, another miracle. He smiled and walked away. Kendra adjusted the IV drip, checked vitals, smoothed the blanket over her patient's chest. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, life continuing. Death held back one more day. The choice to see dignity in others is always yours. Choose wisely.